Hello and welcome to Cat's Tales. It's not long at all now before the new Radio 5 network opens, with lots more programmes for children and young people. Here at the BBC's headquarters in London, Albert and Herbert have been very busy getting the new studios ready. Should think they've almost finished now. Let's see.
Oh, look, Herbert, what a nice surprise. It's
Loopy from Elephant's Ears. Yes, I know, Albert. Ha, ha. I'm used to you by now. Ha, ha.
No, it's not. It's Julie from Cat's Tales. Fancy you not knowing who you are. You haven't got a touch of the sun, have you, Julie?
No, Albert. I was trying to be funny, to be witty.
To be whatty?
Not watty, witty.
Not watty, witty? Why not?
Why not what?
Why not what? Why not witty, watty? That's what.
What's what? That's not what I wanted. I wanted to be witty, that's what. Not witty-watty. That's not what I wanted. What's witty-watty, anyway? What's it mean, Albert?
Don't ask me. You started it.
Let's change the subject. Herbert, have you been busy?
Have we been busy?
Have we been busy?
Have we been busy?
Have we?
Been busy? Oh, well, I have, I suppose, I bet. Have you seen these plants?
I could hardly miss them. They're everywhere. I mean, they're very nice. Give a sort of a jungly feel to the place.
Oh, plants. Oh, plants. You got to be careful with plants.
Why?
I just hope no one gets hay fever. The terrible sniffles. Imagine that. The first day of Radio 5.
August the 27th, 1990, as ever was.
Big fanfare.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful new radio.
Achoo!
Himself wouldn't be pleased, not the managing director.
He'd understand, though.
He'd understand, of course he would. Heart of gold, that man. But deep down...
At the core of his being.
At the core of his being, he wouldn't be pleased.
No.
Probably sacked a lot of us on the spot.
Don't worry, boys. There's no danger of anyone getting hay fever. None at all.
No?
That's good. Why not?
Why not what?
Let's not start that again. What I'm saying is there's no danger of anyone getting hay fever from these plants because they aren't real. I've just examined them.
Not real?
No, they're very clever plastic imitations.
Oh, no. Oh, dear, oh, dear, oh, dear.
Herbert, what's the matter? I thought you'd be pleased they're plastic. Herbert!
He's been watering them 3 times a day for the last week. That's why he was so busy.
It's not just that. It's the fertilizer.
You put fertilizer on them?
Every day. Now I know why they went all funny for plants. They went all squidgy.
Never mind. Look, last week I was asking about telephones. Have you got one yet?
1? We've got 17.
17? Can I use one of them?
Sorry, afraid not.
Why not?
Well, although we've got 17 telephones, we haven't got any plugs.
Yes, we have. I got them.
You did indeed. 17 bath plugs. They sent him out to get 17 plugs and he came back with 17 bath plugs, I ask you.
It was a perfectly natural mistake, I can explain. You see, Julie,
Never mind, Herbert. We'll leave it till next week, shall we? I just hope the telephones are working by then. And while you're sorting all that out, I'm going down to the River Thames to continue my journey. Meanwhile, let's listen to this week's episode of The Last Vampire.
The next morning, Emily Hollins found that the 2 guard dogs had been joined by a third. Suddenly, she had a brilliant idea. She decided to visit the castle that very day, confront the Count and tell him that he should give his pets the attention that they needed and deserved. As it was still early, she decided that she would take the dogs on a ramble around the countryside before presenting herself at the castle gates. To her surprise, they showed little enthusiasm and she threw a stick for them to chase. She waved the stick under the pack leader's nose. "Here, boy, smell, smell, boy." The wolf pack leader sniffed at the stick disdainfully. It was becoming increasingly obvious to Emily that no one had taken the trouble to teach any of the dogs anything at all. Well, she would give them one more chance. Drawing back her arm once again, she launched the stick into the air. The 3 wolves hardly raised an eyebrow as the stick rose, then dipped, and finally dropped into a patch of undergrowth. "Fetch it! Fetch! Fetch!" bellowed Emily for the umpteenth time. Then, in order to give the animals an idea of what was expected of them, she sprinted after the stick, head down, into the very heart of the undergrowth. The 3 wolves followed Emily's progress with complete disinterest. All three, however, sat bolt upright and took notice as suddenly the earth appeared to open and Emily, with no more than a sharp gasp of surprise, disappeared from sight. A large hole, previously hidden in the thick tangle of undergrowth, marked the point at which Emily had entered the bowels of the earth. As she had felt the ground give way beneath her, Emily had grasped out wildly with both her hands, but there was nothing to hold on to, and she felt herself scrabbling at air. She had landed with a painful bump in some sort of underground chamber. Then, looking up instinctively towards the only source of light that filtered through the hole by which she had entered, Emily was further reassured to see her three companions, the guard dogs, peering down at her. "Good boys, good dogs," said Emily encouragingly. "Quickly, go and fetch help." The next meeting of the villagers had to be held in the cobbled marketplace when it became obvious that the village hall was not big enough to hold the number of people who had turned up. "My friends," said Sergeant Croppertail solemnly, "the mayor and I visited the castle Alucard yesterday, and from what we saw I greatly fear that we are plagued with not one vampire, but an entire family of them." The policeman stroked at his beard to give an added emphasis to his next words. "All those in favour of besieging the castle Alucard and destroying the vampires for all time, raise your right hands." Right hands shot up and waved wildly everywhere until the market square looked like a field of corn in a high wind. Hummelschaft, the bull-necked farmer, turned towards the police sergeant. "How soon do we leave?" he demanded. Croppertail considered the question. "I think we ought to wait until tonight. We shall need to go bearing the usual weapons, scythes, hay forks, that sort of thing, anything sharp or pointed." "Do you hear that, all of you?" bellowed the barrel-chested farmer at the crowd, interrupting what the police sergeant was saying. "You must go home now and return here again at dusk, bringing your weapons with you. We'll give those vampires something to think about." Count Alucard stood with his back to the castle window and faced the two visitors seated in his room. "Tell me everything you know about your mother's disappearance." Henry shook his head despairingly. "There isn't much to tell. She'd gone when we woke up this morning." "We wondered," said Albert, "if she might have come up here to fetch some water from the pump, then wandered into the castle and lost her way, perhaps got locked in a room or something." Count Alucard's long fingers waved in the air, refuting the suggestion. "She hasn't been near here. I'd have been sure to see her. But if it would ease your minds, we can search the castle." "If you're sure it wouldn't be putting you to any trouble, Count," said Albert. "No trouble at all." He led them first to the topmost crumbling turret, and from that starting point they worked their way down narrow, winding, worn stone staircases through every single nook, corner and cranny to the lowest, dankest dungeon. But there was no sign of her anywhere, and the sky was beginning to darken. Emily Hollins stood in the golden glow of the flickering candle she dotted around the vaulted walls. She could make out at least half a dozen stone platforms, on each of which there rested a long, black, polished box with ornate brass handles attached to the sides. The lid of each of the boxes was propped open, and stretched out in the crimson-padded interior was a grinning skeleton. She had, without knowing it, discovered the long-lost tomb of Count Alucard's vampire ancestors. Emily let out a short, sharp, horrified gasp. It wasn't the skeletons that had given her cause for alarm. So what was it? Simply the many years' accumulation of dust and dirt. Emily Hollins was a stickler for cleanliness. The underground tomb, Emily saw, was inches thick in dust and dirt. There was only one thing for it. While waiting for the faithful guard dogs to return with help, she would pass the time by giving the tomb a bit of a spring clean, regardless of the fact that it was not the right season. To her great joy, she discovered a broom propped up in a corner of the tomb. A large handkerchief she carried in her handbag would serve as a duster. True, she lacked any kind of cleaning wax or polish, but Emily had discovered years before that good old-fashioned elbow grease served as a useful substitute for both of these products. Setting to work with a will, Emily toiled long and diligently, and the spotlessness of the tomb now reflected her efforts. The floor tiles gleamed, their marbles shone, the dark wood coffins glowed, their brass fitments sparkled in the candlelight. Even the silent skeleton seemed to wear a more contented smile. "Whew, that's better," she said to herself, relaxing in the self-satisfaction of a job well done. But her pleasure was to prove short-lived. Glancing upwards through the hole by which she'd entered, Emily was surprised to see that the sun was setting and the evening drawing in. How quickly the day had gone. Was she going to have to spend the night inside the tomb? It was getting colder. She pulled her cardigan up around her neck and shivered slightly. "Come along, Emily," she said sharply to herself. "This won't do at all. You're going to have to pull yourself together, my girl. If help isn't on its way, why, then it's up to you to help yourself." But how? Then an idea occurred to her. At one end of the tomb, she remembered, there was an alcove into which she'd swept the dust and rubbish. She'd not paid much attention to the alcove at the time, but might it not conceal a door of some kind? Crossing the chamber quickly, Emily held up her candle and peered inside the dark and gloomy recess. Yes, there was a door, right at the very back of the alcove and half hidden by the many years' accumulation of dust and grime. The narrow passage which stretched away in front of Emily was as black as pitch. There was no knowing what lay at the other end of the dark tunnel. There was only one way to find out. Emily picked up her candle, and she was about to set off when she remembered something she'd almost forgotten. She stepped back into the tomb and collected what it was that she was taking with her. Then, returning to the passage and holding the candle in front of her, she set off, slowly but resolutely, into the dark.
And we'll have to wait until next week to find out what happens in The Last Vampire. Well, down here on the River Thames, there's no vampires, but there's plenty of wildlife, both in the river and along the banks. I've arrived at an area called Barking Reach, and with me is Martin Hall of the London Wildlife Trust. Now, as we walk along the banks, this is one of the wider parts of the River Thames, isn't it?
That's right. This stretch here must go on across the river for about 300 metres. In front of us, we've got a very nice area here from the water upwards of about 10 metres, where we've got lots of rubble and things like that, and there's some bits of seaweed you can see growing on there. And this area is what we actually call a salt marsh, because half the time it's covered by the river and half the time it's exposed like this. So the plants we find here, such as that one down there, which is a lavender called sea lavender, have to be able to live in an area where sometimes they're in saline water and sometimes they're bone dry. So it's not like the sort of plants you find in your garden.
It's a bit like being at the seaside, isn't it? The tide's out a little bit. You've got the water lapping, and you've got a little bit of breeze.
That's right.
And no seagulls.
No, there's no seagulls, but there's lots of other birds. We've just seen a pair of cormorants flying up and down the river, big blackbirds, really nice. They'll be out trying to catch the fish that they can find. Up in front of us, on the actual river, we can also see a lot of shell duck out there, and they're birds that like to go out on the water. Then when the tide comes out, they'll actually be feeding on all the exposed mud, picking out the worms and the insects that live in the mud. And also, on the kind of rubbly bit in front of us here, the salt marsh, we get birds called little ring plovers that like to make nests using all the rubble and the shells that we can see in front of us. And their nest, basically, is just a small scrape that they make, and they lay their eggs in that. And the eggs are perfectly camouflaged, so they're very, very difficult to see. And hopefully we'll hear some of those as we keep walking along.
Well, what about the types of birds that don't hang around the water's edge and perhaps stay around the grassy banks to the left of us?
That's quite right. We get birds such as skylarks. I'm not sure if we can hear it yet. There's skylarks flying up above us, warning us that we're getting close to one of their nesting areas. And the skylarks are very interesting birds because, again, they don't nest in trees like a lot of birds that we see. They actually nest on the ground in amongst the grasses. And they try and find an area of tussocky grass, so it's slightly higher, to hide away their nest. And as we walk along and disturb them, they will run along the ground and then fly, so we don't exactly know where their nest is. It's one of their ways of protecting their eggs.
I think we're getting into a little
it's
bit
getting wetter and wetter as we're going along. Should we
Climb
move up
back
the
on
banks
the banks,
slightly?
yes, yeah. But has the wildlife changed very much over the years as far as the birds and plants are concerned?
The plants have changed greatly because as the land uses changes, some of this land here has been covered with pulverised fuel ash, which came out from one of the existing power stations here. And so they covered all the vegetation in this fuel ash to a depth of about 2 or 3 metres. But as you can see, all the grass and everything's growing back through that, and it's now returning to the sort of habitat which we would call Thames grazing marsh that had been found here hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This is one of the last remaining areas of grazing marsh, along with Rainham Marshes, just further along around the corner, left in London, and we've lost about 85% of these sort of habitats in southeast England over the last 50 years.
Now, it's very tempting to actually have a paddle in this water, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is.
But it looks a little murky.
Yeah, I mean, the murkiness of the water is just caused by all the silt that we were looking at earlier on the mudflats getting disturbed as the waves come in. But, I mean, there are problems with sewage waste coming in from the sewage works further down in London. You also get a problem further up into the countryside where we get fertilisers being washed off farmers' fields that they put on to grow the crops. And again, that forms another type of pollution which affects the plants and the animals that live in the River Thames. The River Thames is being cleaned up all the time by the National Rivers Authority, and we quite often hear about things such as the first salmon that was caught a few months ago along the River Thames, which shows that the salmon are being able to pass up and down the river, something they haven't been able to do for many years while it's more polluted. And of course we get things such as the dolphins that came up a few months ago, and sadly they actually did die due to pollution and stress-related illnesses.
What sort of fish are likely to be in the river here?
Right, the part of the river in here is quite interesting because, as I said earlier, we got the two types of water coming in. We got the fresh water and the salt water coming in from the sea, so that affects the type of fish. And coming in from the sea we get things such as the flounder, whiting and cod, and also eels will make their way up the river. During the summer, as the water warms up, we get species such as bass and mullet coming in. So, I mean, there's a whole variety of fish.
Well, of course, the birds aren't around here all the time, are they?
Yeah, you're right. The birds that we find here will change throughout the year. If we came here in the winter after the autumn migration, when the birds from northern England travel down to Africa and the Mediterranean countries, we would see things like hundreds and hundreds of birds such as teal, which are very similar to the shelducks, which would be out on the water. And as the winter gets harder and harder and colder, they will keep coming down south to get slightly warmer. And so you'll kind of get phases of birds that come down with the changing of weather. And again in the spring we get exactly the same thing. We get birds using the River Thames as a green corridor, travelling all the way up through London because it's a safe zone for them. They can feed all the way up, and it would take them through London up until the countryside, the other side of London.
Do you get very many swans on this part of the river?
We don't get a lot here, no, because of the salty water. To get swans, you'd have to go further up the Thames into where we get into the freshwater and the freshwater fish.
Of course, that's where the swan upping comes in, isn't it?
That's right. That's where they mark the birds and check the populations of the birds and check their health as well.
Well, I don't know whether you've noticed, Martin, but we've both got soggy feet because the tide's come in.
I have noticed.
It's lapping over our
yeah,
shoes.
I've got soggy socks. Yeah, I think it'd be a good idea if we moved up the bank a bit onto higher ground.
Yeah, I think we'd better. Well, while we make our way up the bank, let's listen to this week's episode of The House of Arden.
This time, when the Mouldy Warp's magical clock spun Edred and Elfrida on a journey in time, they weren't looking for the Arden treasure, but for something much more precious. This time, they were seeking their father, whom the children had thought was lost to them forever, but whom Cousin Richard had said he'd seen on one of his own journeys in time.
Edred, the clock's stopping. Where do you suppose we are? Can't tell. Cousin Richard, do you know? I can't say I do.
That's because we ain't there yet. Diddle. It takes longer to get somewhere that's in your own time than just up and around in a street.
Oh dear, I don't know if I like this. It seems so different from before when we went back in time. That all just seemed like a game.
I know, and this seems, well, it seems...
Aye, this is real, my lambs. Now, listen to Mouldy-Warp. Your cousin Richard here will help you, and then, when you get your father back, as I'm sure you will, Richard will go back to his own time.
Well, I'm not sure I believe we will get Daddy back.
Oh, well, of course, if you don't believe, you'll not find him. That's as plain as a currant loaf.
But I believe, and even if this is only a dream, I'm going to stay in it.
All right.
And I'm not going back to Arden Castle without our father.
Well said. But before I can take you one clock spin further, there's something you must understand. After a trip into a time and place in your own century, there can't be no more travels.
You mean no more chances of finding the treasure?
That's right. No more chestses and attics, no more white clots, and if you find your father, you'll not be Lord Arden no more.
Oh, well, I don't care, and we don't care about the treasure either, do we, Elf?
No.
Not if we can have our father back.
So please, Mouldiwarp, take us to where our father is.
All right. Children is such impatient bodies. But first, we've got to settle what you'll be, so as you won't stand out.
You can disguise as Mouldy. That way we won't look out of place, wherever the place is.
And Father won't recognise us, so he won't accidentally give the game away.
And he won't know magic's involved. You can disguise me too, Mouldy.
Oh, no. Not you, young Richard. You'll be best to stay as you are. But as for you two...
And Mouldiwarp waved a white paw at Edred and Elfrida, who at once found themselves dressed in tight-fitting white fur suits. Even their hands were covered with white fur gloves that had tiger claws at the ends of the fingers. This was surprise enough. But then something even more peculiar began to happen.
Hey, what's going on?
I don't know. Richard, you're getting taller.
Whoa, Mouldiwarp, you're getting bigger too. Richard, stop, you're as big as a giant.
It isn't me who's got bigger. Can't you see what's happened?
No. Mouldy, you look more like a polar bear than a mole. What?
No time. Back onto the clock.
The clock, very obediently, started at once. And again the minute hand on which they were all sitting began to whirl.
Now where are we?
I don't know, but it's a lovely warm night. You'd think we'd be hot in these furry suits, but I'm not.
You two do look like a rum pair.
Well, you and Mouldy look pretty silly yourselves. 50 times bigger than normal.
They still don't see it, Mouldy.
See what?
What your disguise is, you gooses. Only you're not gooses.
Don't you see? You're cats. 2 white cats.
Edred, he's right. You are a cat.
So are you.
Yes. There's no point in being cats or anything else if we don't get on with the plan.
The plan's this. The people of this country we're in have never seen tame cats. They think a person who can tame animals is a magician. And I've got 3 tame animals.
3? Oh, you mean Mouldiwarp too?
Oh, well, of course. If you don't want me to help you.
Oh, of course we do, Mouldy. Go on, Richard.
They'll be so fascinated they won't suspect us. But you 2 cats must only meow and purr and only do what I tell you.
Well,
Yes.
all right, if it'll help get Father back.
Oh, Richard, is our father really here?
And your Uncle Jim. They're on the other side of that cliff over there.
The cliff no man can climb.
But you 2 are cats, aren't you? And I can be carried up on Mouldiwarp's back.
But come along.
We're coming.
When they reached the bottom of the towering cliff, Richard climbed onto Mouldiwarp's polar bear-like back, and the little party began to climb. And what a climb it was! Even as sure-footed cats, Edred and Elfrida found it as much as they could do to keep their paws on the smooth little shelving ledges.
I've heard of foreign climbs, but I never thought it'd be like this.
I suppose we are somewhere foreign, are we, Mouldy?
Of course. South America, ain't it? But you won't find it on no map now. Do hurry up there.
But then, of course, once they'd climbed to the top of the cliff, they had to climb down the other side. Finally, though, they were down, and standing on the edge of a very large and very wonderful plain on which stood a city. It was so beautiful, it almost took away what breath the children had left.
Oh, it's wonderful. Look at all those parks and fountains.
And the buildings, they all look like palaces.
Even the roofs of the smaller houses look like they're made of gold. And have you ever seen such beautiful gardens?
Come on, we'll make for that big tree over there.
All right, we're coming. Oh!
What are they? They're just llamas, silly. Come on, everybody.
Here we are. Over here, you two. Now, all sit down here under this here tree. That's it.
Now we're here, what do we do?
Cheerful. Why is it children always has to be doing something?
We don't do anything. We just sit here and wait.
Yes, but wait for what?
Young peoples is such worrisome creatures, even when they turn into cats. Why, we wait to be found, that's what.
And so the children settled down under the shady tree to begin their waiting. But as the sun climbed higher over the strange and wonderful city before them, both Edred and Elfrida privately began to worry. Wait for what to find them? And even if they were found by something or somebody nice, would they ever find their father?
And there'll be more mystery from the House of Arden in next week's programme. Meanwhile, back here by the River Thames at Barking Reach, Martin Hall is with me from the London Wildlife Trust. As we climb up the bank here, we come into an area that is a wide expanse of greenery, fields and plants.
Yes, this area is actually grazed by cattle as well. That's why the grass is so short. If it wasn't for the cattle grazing here, we'd be walking through grass that would be up to our knees. The plants that we can see here, we've got some nice yellow ones over here, which are called bird's-foot trefoil, but they've got a different name that a lot of people use, which is called bacon and eggs, which is quite nice because of the yellow and red flowers.
One of the plants I noticed on the way up here, Martin, was this large one over here with the big purple flowers.
That's right. I'm glad you noticed that one because that's one of the quite uncommon plants we've got here. It's called deadly nightshade, and it's one of the plants we're warned to keep away from because of the black berries that the plant has. You can tell that it's a poisonous plant by the fact it has got the black flowers. They're more or less warning you to keep away. I mean, there's not many plants that have these sort of dark flowers like that.
What other colourful flowers do you have?
We've got a whole mass of white flowers in front of us, so it looks a bit like snow, but again, this is just one of the flowers of the cress family, and this is called hairy cress, the one we can see in front of us. There's the brambles coming out, and if we actually look just around the corner here, it's not a plant, but it's something that's affected the plant, so you can see rabbits, and there's an actual tunnel that the rabbits are made going up through the bramble, and they like to live in amongst warrens in the brambles because the thorns protect them from other dogs and things like that coming in to try and catch them.
It's so nice to see such a wild area, which is actually in London.
That's right, it is. The sad thing is that this area is actually under threat from developers who want to build housing and a power station and factories here, and London Wildlife Trust is trying to stop or at least reduce some of the development that's planned for this area.
Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. Thank you for showing us around, Martin.
Well, thank you for coming. It's been very nice to meet you.
Before you go, perhaps you'd like to set us our competition question.
Right. The question I'd like to put for this week's competition is, what's the name of the poisonous plant that we spoke about earlier?
OK, so what's the name of the poisonous plant? And make sure you keep that answer along with the previous answers, and eventually you should have 8 altogether. Well, that's it from me here on the river at Barking Reach. Next week, we'll be taking another journey along the River Thames and finding out how the new Radio 5 studios are coming along. Well, the ship's cat is saying that it's time for me to go, so I better put away my waterproofs and take off my sou'wester. Until next week, farewell, me hearties.
Cat's Tales was presented by Julie Mayer and produced by the Cat's Tales team. Victoria Wood read The Last Vampire by Willis Hall, adapted by Alfred Bradley. Penelope Keith was the narrator in The House of Arden.